I always thought a ranger's nightmare was getting lost in the mountains, lost in the desert. I was wrong. It's much scarier to find signs left by something that shouldn't be here. My name is Thomas McCarthy, and September 2008 taught me, some doors are better left unlocked, some secrets are better left untouched. Glacier is a harsh place, 1,000,000 acres of wilderness near the Canadian border, where bears weigh 800 pounds and the weather can change in half an hour. 17 years I've worked here. I came after the army when the Afghanistan operation was over, and I needed a place to forget the faces of my dead comrades. I live alone at Kintla Lake Station, the furthest station in the park. The nearest neighbor is 40 miles away. I don't remember my childhood well. My parents died when I was 10, at least that's what they said. I was raised by Martha Henderson of Kalispell, a ranger's widow, a woman of good hands and iron will. She taught me how to read tracks, how to make a fire in the rain, how to recognize the sounds of the forest. It was she who instilled a love of the mountains. Doctors attributed the memory lapses to the trauma of a car crash that killed his parents. I only remember bits and pieces of the accident, the bright lights, the screams, then the hospital room. Martha never liked to talk about that time. When I tried to ask, she waved it away. The past is the past, Tom. It's what's ahead that matters. Died 5 years ago, taking all the answers with her. In September, my superiors asked me to dismantle the archives for digitization. The usual bureaucratic work, boxes of dusty documents, photos, maps, half a century of the park's history. In the materials of 1958, I came across a thick envelope with photos of tourist groups at the Ptarmigan waterfall. Standard shots, people posing against the background of falling water, smiling into the lens. In the third picture, I saw my face. Not a relative, not a person who looked like me, just me. The same nose with a slight bump, the same gray eyes, the same scar on his chin from a childhood fall from a bicycle. The man stood to the right in a group of 5, holding a geological hammer, looking straight into the camera. On the back in faded ink, August 1958, Dr. Holmes Research Group, Ptarmigan Falls. The problem was that I was born in 1968. Jenny from Human Resources checked the database at my request. The expedition authorization was on file, but the document was missing, and the file was marked classified federal. It was weird. Ordinary geological research is not classified. Betty, the old librarian at the Kalispell City Library, remembered Dr. Holmes, who had taught geology at the university, then disappeared in the winter of '58. In the university newspaper, he found an obituary of Sarah Milton, a graduate student of geology who had died in the mountains in the autumn of that year. And the local paper mentioned the death of David Clark, a guide who had been killed in an avalanche in November. 2 of the 5 participants are dead within months of that photo. Coincidence? Or something more? Around midnight, the phone rang at the station. Mr. McCarthy? A woman's voice, calm, confident. Yes? My name is Elizabeth Holmes. I am the daughter of Dr. William Holmes. I am aware that you found the photograph. The cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. How do you know? I have sources in the park archives. We need to meet urgently. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock, the Morning Glory Cafe in Kalispell. Come alone and bring a photograph. What does who I really am mean? But she'd already hung up. Dr. Elizabeth Holmes was sitting by the window, a woman in her 70s with attentive gray eyes and neatly styled gray hair. When I showed her the photograph, her face paled visibly. It's really your face. Every feature, every detail. What do you remember about your childhood before you were 10? Practically nothing. Bits and pieces like dreams. The doctors attributed it to the effects of the car crash. Elizabeth shook her head. Thomas, there was no car accident. Neither did a parent named McCarthy who died in 1978. It was as if the cafe around them had gone quiet. The sounds became muffled. In 1958, my father led a research expedition in the Gleicher Mountains. Officially a geological survey. Actually, it was a search for a fallen object of unknown origin on behalf of the military. Something collapsed in the mountains in July of that year. She pulled an old photograph out of her purse, a middle-aged man in a lab coat. This is my father, a year after the expedition. He turned 51 in August of '58. He looks 35 at the most in this picture, and continued to look that way until his death in 1994. What do you mean? The expedition found the source of something incredible. something that stops or slows the aging process. You were there, Thomas. The real Thomas McCarthy, expedition technician, 30 years old. And that child they found in the woods in 1978 with no memory and no ID. That was you too, only it was 20 years later and you looked a decade younger. She got up, leaving a 20 on the table. If you want to know the truth, tomorrow at midnight, the old sawmill by Echo Lake. Come alone. And remember, there are men who have killed for far less knowledge. I sat in the cafe for another half an hour trying to digest what I had heard. If Elizabeth is right, my whole life is a carefully constructed lie. A childhood I don't remember. A foster mother who might have known the truth but kept silent. In the evening, I decided to verify at least part of what she said. I went to the town hall, to the civil registry department. The clerk, an elderly woman with thick glasses, spent half an hour going through the card catalog for 1978. Very strange, she said at last. There's no death record for the McCarthy couple for the 78th year. Checked the neighboring years too, nothing. And Thomas McCarthy's birth certificate? There is a record of a certificate being issued in August 1978, but this is really unusual. Such documents are usually issued at birth. 10 years is a very long time. It usually happens when a child is found without papers. 10 years old. That's how old I was when I was supposedly adopted by Martha. I called Jim Carter, an old friend from his time in Afghanistan. After the army, he became sheriff in a neighboring county. Jim, can you pull up the accident database for 78? I'm looking for an accident with a fatality, the McCarthy couple. Just a second, Tom. I checked all year. A few fatal crashes, but none with that last name. You know what's interesting? There's a record of a child found in the database for August 78th. A boy about 10 years old, unconscious, found in the woods near Echo Lake. No identification on him. Echo Lake, the very place where Elizabeth made the appointment. At 12:30, I drove to Echo Lake. The old sawmill had stood on the shore since the 30s, abandoned for about 30 years. I parked 100 meters from the building and walked up. The solid wooden door was slightly ajar. Inside, someone was already waiting, but not Elizabeth Holmes. A man in his 60s wearing an expensive dark coat stood in the center of the room. Two younger men in black jackets stood beside him, their arms hanging loosely along their bodies, but their arms were clearly concealed weapons. Mr. McCarthy, we finally meet in person. Where's Dr. Holmes? In a safe place for now. The man took a step forward. Allow me to introduce myself, Daniel Gray. I represent certain interested parties. Which sides? Those who have been following the aftermath of the 1958 expedition for half a century now. We knew that sooner or later you would start asking uncomfortable questions. Gray took a pack of expensive cigarettes out of his pocket and lit a cigarette leisurely. Thomas, you are not who you think you are. Dr. Holmes's expedition was indeed looking for a fallen object, and they found it in the thickness of a glacier at 10,000 feet. A metal disc about 6 feet in diameter, surface temperature 40 degrees below the surrounding ice. And what happened to the members of the expedition? The object emitted an unknown form of energy. It affected living organisms, radically slowing down the aging process. But there was a serious side effect, partial or total memory loss. Dr. Holmes was with him for several hours, got enough of a dose to slow aging, but retained his memory. Sarah Milton and David Clark had a longer exposure. They had to be neutralized. You killed them. We protected national security. And you, Thomas, were found right next to the facility, unconscious, no memory, but alive. You'd been there for days. A few days? The subject affected you so intensely that your biological age literally rolled back. A 30-year-old man turned into a 10-year-old child, with his memory completely erased. Gray took a puff. We've watched you for 30 years, Thomas. Put you in a foster home, followed your development, your career. You are the only person in the world who received a full dose of radiation and survived. Over the years, we've replicated the effect in the lab. We've created a group of people with delayed aging, military, politicians, scientists. One of the guards took a step in my direction. But there's a problem. The effect is unstable without a regular boost. Every 10 years, you need a new dose. Your next treatment is scheduled for tomorrow. 30 years is exactly 3 cycles. And if I refuse, repeat the fate of Sarah Milton and David Clark. Gray nodded to the guards. They moved toward me. I retreated to the side door. Think about it, Thomas. Practical immortality in exchange for cooperation. He rushed for the exit. Behind me there were commands and the stomping of boots. I jumped out, ran to the car. I started the car from the first corner, gave it full throttle. I drove along the mountain roads until dawn. Every half an hour I stopped and listened to see if there was any pursuit. By morning it was clear there was no turning back. Gray and his men would not stop. For 3 days, I hid in an abandoned weather station near the Canadian border. Thought about what Gray said. If he wasn't lying, there are dozens of people in this country who depend on this technology, all willing to kill to keep the secret. On the 4th day, he went to Missoula to the university. Professor Anderson of the geology department remembered Dr. Holmes. He had disappeared in the winter of '58. His daughter Elizabeth came 4 years ago and took most of his father's archive. Not much has survived in the basement archive. Drafts of lectures, correspondence, and one letter to a colleague from November 1958. Robert, our discovery is more dangerous than it seemed. They've taken samples, documents, people. I fear for Thomas and the others. If anything happens, remember, the object must be destroyed, not studied. Went to Seattle to see Elizabeth. The house had been searched. Furniture moved, books on the floor, paintings torn down. They were looking for something specific. There was a note with my name on the bed in the bedroom. Thomas, if you're reading this, it means they got to me. There's a stash in the basement behind the water heater. Take everything. Find Dr. Samuels at Los Alamos. He'll help you. Tell him Project Mirror must be stopped. Found a metal box in the basement cache. Dr. Holmes's diary. Photographs of a silver disc with symbols, radiation patterns, and a list. 27 names. Politicians, generals, judges, corporate directors. Recognized a few. Senator Harris, General Thompson, CIA Director Williams. Next to the names, dates of procedures, dosages. At the end of the list, my name with a note. Subject Alpha, full exposure, requires monitoring. The last document is a plan of an underground base in Nevada, the Mirror Lab. That's where the facility was stored, where people were brought in for procedures. 3 black cars were parked outside the house. I got out through the back window and walked to the bus station. On the bus to Albuquerque, I noticed a man in a gray suit pretending to read a newspaper. There was a whole system working against me now. People who'd been running this country for half a century, but I wasn't about to give up either. Living on stolen time is no life. Dr. Samuels met me in a small house on the outskirts of Los Alamos. An old man in his 80s, his hands shaking, but his eyes clear. When he called me Mirror, he silently poured me a whiskey. I've been waiting half a century for this conversation. I studied the site after the expedition. A young physicist, I believed I was saving humanity. Only later did I realize we'd created a curse. Samuels pulled out a thick folder. The object is not of alien origin. It's a time machine for our descendants, a message from the future, a warning of the dangers of immortality to the elite. What kind of danger are you talking about? Power concentrated in the hands of people who will never die. Stagnation, degradation, the end of development. The object was to show where it leads. He showed the schematics. The radiation is unstable. The effect wears off with each treatment. In 10 years, the system will collapse. All the recipients will die of accelerated aging, but they know that. They're making artificial copies of the subject. How do we stop it? Only by destroying the original. Without it, the copies won't work. Samuels held out a device the size of a walkie-talkie. Energy field jammer. Connect it to the emitter. The object will become unstable and explode, but the process must be started manually and stay until the end. The explosion will cover everything within a kilometer radius. The next day we drove to Nevada. Samuels knew the old roads through the desert. The base was in a remote part of the range, underground. They waited for the changing of the guard, and Samuels disabled some of the alarms. Codes from the 50s still worked in the old systems. We went down 300 feet underground. Found the hostage block, 30 people under IVs, Elizabeth among them, alive. Half an hour to get them upstairs, Samuel said. I'm going to the facility. I went even lower, a circular room with a silver disc in the center under a transparent dome. The symbols on the surface slowly shimmered with colors. All around were instruments, monitors, computers from half a century of research. Connected the muffler to the main transmitter. The device fit right in. The countdown on the screen lit up. 10 minutes. I sat down by the wall, pulled out a photograph from 1958, the faces of the people standing by the waterfall, Holmes dreaming of scientific discoveries, Milton, full of enthusiasm, Clark, a simple guy who loved the mountains, and me, not knowing at the time what I'd gotten myself into. Maybe our descendants sent the object for this very moment, for someone to make the right choice. 5 minutes, the object pulsed brighter. The symbols were forming into patterns, almost familiar. In the last few seconds, I realized the object was a message, a warning. Immortality is not a gift, but a curse. Each generation must give way to the next. The light became blinding. Then silence. He woke up in a Las Vegas hospital 3 weeks later. Elizabeth was sitting next to him, alive and well. Base disappeared. Officially an earthquake. She showed the papers. Senator Harris, heart attack. General Thompson, stroke. Director of the CIA, cancer in a fortnight. Everyone on the project died one by one. Without the facility, the system collapsed. Their bodies could no longer support the artificial youth. And me? Special case. A full dose 50 years ago stabilized the process. You'll age more slowly than usual, but normally. A month later, he returned to Glacier. My colleagues thought I was on holiday. I returned to work, to the mountains, to silence. Sometimes tourists ask about the Ptarmigan waterfall. I tell them about nature and how important it is to protect what we have. I don't mention the photo. It burned down together with the base. Some secrets are better buried, and some stories need to be remembered. So people know that the most dangerous enemies are not bears and avalanches. It's those who think they deserve more time than nature has given them. I'm 40 years old. I look 30. I'll probably live longer than anyone else. But every day I remember it's a responsibility, not a privilege. To protect what's important. To protect those who are weaker. And never go through the archives again.